What happens when a congressman walks onto a late-night show thinking they own the place, ready to lecture everyone watching, only to discover that disrespecting the host comes with consequences? In just 34 seconds of one single comment, everything fell apart. This is the story of how Jasmine Crockett went from guest to gone, and how one of television's most respected hosts stood his ground when it mattered most. Greg Gutfeld has built his career on being fair. Night after night, he brings people from all sides onto his show. He listens, he debates, he jokes around. But most importantly, he treats his guests with respect, even when they disagree with him. That's what makes his show work. That's why millions of people tune in. They know they're going to get honest conversation, not staged drama. But on this particular night, Greg had no idea what was coming. Jasmine Crockett walked onto the set with an attitude that filled the entire studio. You could see it in the way she carried herself. You could hear it in her voice before she even sat down. She didn't come to have a conversation. She came to make a statement. She came to win. And in her mind, winning meant making Greg look small. The show started normally enough. Greg welcomed her with his usual charm, smiling, making a light joke to break the ice. The audience laughed. It was all very standard, very professional. "Congresswoman, thanks so much for being here tonight," Greg said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We're really glad to have you." Jasmine sat down, barely acknowledging his welcome. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him back. She just stared at him with this look that said she was already annoyed. "Let's jump right in," Greg continued, keeping his tone friendly and upbeat. "There's been a lot of talk lately about your recent comments on economic policy. Can you walk us through your position?" It was a fair question, a softball really, the kind of question that any guest would appreciate because it lets them explain their views without any pushback right away. But Jasmine didn't see it that way. "Walk you through it?" she repeated, her voice dripping with condescension. "Greg, I don't think I need to walk you through anything. My position is clear to anyone who's actually paying attention." The studio went quiet. You could feel the tension immediately. Greg's smile faltered just slightly, but he recovered quickly. He's a professional. He's handled difficult guests before. "Well, sure," Greg said, keeping his cool. "But for our audience who might not have heard your full statement, it would be great if you could." "Your audience?" Jasmine interrupted, leaning forward in her chair. "Let's talk about your audience, Greg. Do you really think that people watching this show are interested in real policy discussion? Or are they just here for your little jokes and your shallow takes on serious issues?" The audience stirred. A few gasps, some uncomfortable shifting in seats. Greg's co-hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't normal guest behavior. This wasn't even normal disagreement. This was personal. This was an attack. But Greg, to his credit, stayed calm. He nodded slowly, processing what she just said. "Jasmine, I think you might be surprised by how informed our viewers are," he said gently. "But let's get back to the topic. You've proposed some pretty significant spending increases. How do you plan to?" "How do I plan?" Jasmine cut him off again, her voice rising. "How do I plan?" "Greg, the fact that you're even asking that question shows how out of touch you are. People are struggling. People are suffering. And you're sitting here in your comfortable studio asking about plans like we're talking about a dinner party." Greg took a breath. He was clearly trying to be patient, trying to give her space to make her point, even if she was being hostile about it. "I understand people are struggling," Greg said. "That's exactly why I'm asking about the specifics of your proposal. The American people deserve to know how their tax dollars will be spent." "The American people," Jasmine scoffed, actually rolling her eyes on camera. "You don't speak for the American people, Greg. You speak for your wealthy donors and your corporate sponsors. Don't pretend this show is about informing anyone. It's about protecting your interests." Now the audience was really uncomfortable. People watch talk shows for debate? Sure. They watch for different perspectives. But they don't watch to see a guest insult the host who invited them on. That's not entertainment. That's just rude. Greg's expression changed. Not angry, but firm. He sat up straighter in his chair. "Jasmine, I invited you here to have a respectful conversation," he said, his voice steady but serious. "I've given you an open platform to share your views, but I'm not going to sit here and let you attack me personally or question my integrity." "Your integrity?" Jasmine laughed. Actually laughed. "That's rich, coming from someone who makes millions spreading." "Careful," Greg warned, holding up one hand. "I've been more than fair with you tonight. Let's keep this about policy, not personal attacks." But Jasmine was on a roll now. She was past the point of listening. She was in her own world, fueled by whatever anger she brought with her onto that stage. "Fair?" she shot back. You want to talk about fair? Nothing about this show is fair, Greg. You bring on guests just to make fun of them. You twist their words. You create these little sound bites for your audience to laugh at. Well, I'm not playing that game. I haven't twisted anything you've said, Greg replied, his jaw tightening. In fact, I've barely been able to get a word in because you keep interrupting. I asked you a simple policy question and you've spent the last 5 minutes attacking me instead of answering. The other panelists on the show were silent now. They knew this had gone too far. They knew something had to give. Jasmine leaned even further forward, pointing her finger at Greg like she was scolding a child. You know what your problem is, Greg? You can't handle a strong woman who won't bow down to you. You can't handle someone who sees through your act. That's what this is really about. That's not what this is about at all, Greg said, shaking his head. This is about you coming on my show and being disrespectful from the moment you sat down. I've interviewed hundreds of strong women on this program. Women who can disagree with me without being disagreeable. Women who can debate without being disrespectful. This has nothing to do with your gender and everything to do with your behavior. My behavior? Jasmine's voice went up another notch. Let me tell you about behavior, Greg. Your behavior is sitting here night after night, punching down at people who are trying to make real change. Your behavior is platforming hate. Your behavior is... Okay, stop, Greg said firmly, cutting her off for the first time. Just stop. I've given you every opportunity to have a real conversation. I've been patient. I've been fair, but you didn't come here to talk. You came here to grandstand and attack, and I'm not going to allow it anymore. The studio was dead silent. Everyone knew what was coming. You could see it on Greg's face. You could feel it in the air. Jasmine must have sensed it too because she went for broke. You're not going to allow it? She said mockingly. What are you going to do, Greg? Can't handle the truth? Can't handle someone who won't play nice for your cameras? This is exactly what I'm talking about. The second someone challenges you, the second someone refuses to kiss the ring, you need to leave, Greg said quietly but firmly. The words hung in the air. Jasmine froze. The audience gasped. This was it. The moment everything changed. Excuse me? Jasmine said, her eyes widening. You need to leave my show, Greg repeated, louder this time. I've tried to have a respectful conversation with you. I've given you every chance to engage in good faith, but you've made it clear that you have no interest in that. You came here to attack me, to insult this show, and to disrespect our audience. I won't tolerate it, so I'm asking you to leave. Jasmine sat back in her chair, clearly shocked. For a moment, she seemed to be calculating her next move. Would she apologize? Would she try to walk it back? No. Instead, she doubled down. This is unbelievable, she said, looking around at the cameras. Everyone watching needs to see this. This is what happens when you speak truth to power. This is what happens when you refuse to play their game. They silence you. They kick you out. Greg Gutfeld can't handle being challenged, so he's literally removing me from his show. You're not being silenced, Greg said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. You've been talking nonstop since you got here. You've said everything you wanted to say. You've just said it in the most disrespectful way possible. This isn't about silencing you. This is about maintaining basic standards of decency on my show. I treat my guests with respect. I expect the same in return. You failed to meet that very low bar. Jasmine stood up abruptly, ripping off her microphone. I don't need to be here, she announced dramatically. I don't need to sit here and be lectured by someone like you. Then leave, Greg said simply. The door's right there, but Jasmine wasn't done yet. She had one more card to play. She turned to face the audience directly. You all need to wake up, she said, her voice echoing through the studio. This man right here, this show, everything you're watching, it's all designed to keep you complacent, to keep you from asking real questions, to keep you from demanding real change. And when someone like me comes along and tries to break through that, this is what happens. They throw you out. The audience didn't react the way she expected. There were no cheers, no applause, just uncomfortable silence. They had watched the whole thing. They saw who attacked whom. They saw who was disrespectful. And it wasn't Greg. Greg stood up too, facing her across the desk. Jasmine, you can spin this however you want when you leave here, he said. You can tell your followers that you were silenced. You can claim you were kicked off for speaking truth. But everyone who watched this knows exactly what happened. You came here with an agenda. You came here to be confrontational. And when I asked you to be respectful, you refused. That's on you. Not on me, not on this show, not on anyone else. That's 100% on you. Jasmine stared at him for a long moment. You could see the wheels turning in her head. She was realizing, perhaps, that this wasn't going to play the way she thought it would. The footage would show everything. Her interruptions, her insults, her refusal to engage in good faith. Whatever, she finally said, waving her hand dismissively. This show is a joke anyway. And with that, she turned and walked off the set. The cameras followed her as she stormed past the crew, past the producers, and disappeared through the exit door. For a moment, Greg just stood there. The studio was silent. Then, slowly, he sat back down. He looked directly into the camera with an expression that was part exhaustion, part disappointment, part resolve. Well, he said, letting out a long breath, that was something. A few nervous chuckles from the audience. You know, folks, Greg continued, his voice returning to its normal tone, I don't enjoy doing that. I really don't. I love having guests with different viewpoints on this show. I love debate. I love disagreement. That's what makes this show interesting. That's what makes this show valuable. But there's a difference between disagreement and disrespect. There's a difference between passionate debate and personal attacks. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been doing this for a long time, Greg went on. I've interviewed people from every political background you can imagine. People who think I'm completely wrong about everything. And you know what? We've had great conversations. We've found common ground. We've disagreed respectfully. Because that's what adults do. That's what public discourse is supposed to look like. The audience started to applaud, softly at first, then louder. They were showing their support not for his politics, but for his principles, for his willingness to stand up for basic respect and decency. What you just witnessed, Greg said, speaking over the applause, is what happens when someone mistakes a platform for a soapbox. When someone confuses debate with demagoguery. I gave Congresswoman Crockett every opportunity to share her views. I asked fair questions. I listened. But she didn't want a conversation. She wanted a confrontation. And when you come onto someone else's show with that attitude, there are consequences. One of Greg's co-hosts, who had been sitting quietly through the whole ordeal, finally spoke up. Greg, I think everyone watching appreciates how you handled that, she said. You were patient, you were fair, and you stood your ground when you needed to. Thank you, Greg nodded. But this isn't about me standing my ground. This is about something bigger. It's about the culture we've created where people think that being the loudest, being the most confrontational, being the most aggressive somehow makes them right. It doesn't. It just makes them loud. Another co-host chimed in. Do you think she came here planning to do that? He asked. Like, was that the strategy from the beginning? Greg thought about it for a moment. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe. Maybe she thought that by attacking me, by being combative, she'd get some kind of viral moment. Maybe she thought her supporters would love it. And hey, maybe they will. But here's what I know. The millions of people watching this show, they're smart enough to see what really happened. They saw someone who was offered a platform and chose to abuse it. They saw someone who was treated with respect and returned it with contempt. That speaks for itself. The show continued from there, but the energy had changed. Everything that came after felt like a footnote to what had just happened. Greg and his remaining guests tried to get back to the planned topics, but it was clear that everyone's mind was still on the confrontation. Throughout the rest of the episode, Greg kept coming back to the same themes: respect, dialogue, the importance of being able to disagree without being disagreeable. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't mocking Jasmine. He was genuinely troubled by what had happened. This is bigger than politics, he said during one segment. This is about how we treat each other, how we communicate, whether we can still have conversations with people we disagree with. And moments like what happened earlier, they make me worry about the answer to that question. As the show wound down, Greg addressed the audience one final time. Look, I know some of you are going to see this and think I was too harsh, he said. You're going to say I should have let her keep talking, that I should have just ignored the personal attacks. And I hear you. But here's the thing. There has to be a line. There has to be a standard. If we don't maintain basic respect, basic decency, then what are we doing? What's the point of any of this? He gestured around the studio. This show, at its best, is a place where people can come together and hash out their differences, Greg continued. Where we can laugh, argue, and maybe, just maybe, understand each other a little better. But that only works if everyone agrees to some basic ground rules. Respect is rule number one. Without it, you don't have dialogue. You just have noise. The audience applauded again, this time a standing ovation. They weren't just applauding Greg. They were applauding the principle, the idea that respect matters, that standards matter, that you can't just treat people however you want and expect no consequences. As the cameras pulled back and the show's theme music started to play, Greg gave his usual sign-off. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow night. Hopefully with guests who actually want to have a conversation. The audience laughed. A release of all the tension that had been building throughout the hour, and that was it. That was how Jasmine Crockett went from congressional guest to ejected troublemaker in the span of one disastrous interview. Not because Greg Gutfeld couldn't handle disagreement, not because he was afraid of strong women or challenging viewpoints, but because she confused a television appearance with a personal vendetta. Because she thought disrespect was the same as courage. Because she failed to understand the most basic rule of being a guest on someone else's show. Treat the host with respect. It's really that simple. Greg didn't ambush her. He didn't trick her. He didn't set her up to fail. He asked fair questions and expected civil discourse. When he didn't get it, when Jasmine made it clear that she had no interest in actual conversation, he did what any host would do. He protected the integrity of his show. The whole thing was a masterclass in maintaining standards, in standing up for basic decency without being cruel about it. Greg didn't yell at Jasmine. He didn't insult her. He didn't fight fire with fire. He simply said, "This is my show. These are my rules. And if you can't follow them, you need to leave." And she left. Some people might see that as censorship, as silencing. But everyone who watched knows better. Jasmine had plenty of opportunity to speak. She just chose to use that opportunity to attack rather than engage. She chose confrontation over conversation. And when that strategy backfired, when she was held accountable for her behavior, she tried to play the victim, but the footage doesn't lie. The audience saw everything. They saw who was respectful and who wasn't. They saw who tried to have a conversation and who just wanted to score points. They saw the whole thing play out in real time. Greg Gutfeld has interviewed countless politicians over the years. Democrats, Republicans, independents, people who love him and people who can't stand him. And somehow, the vast majority of them managed to get through an entire episode without getting kicked off. Why? Because they understand the basic social contract of being a guest on a talk show. You're there to represent your views. Sure. You're there to debate. Absolutely. But you're also there as a guest in someone else's house, and you treat that house with respect. Even if you disagree with everything the host says, even if you think their audience is wrong about everything, you still maintain basic courtesy. Jasmine Crockett forgot that. Or maybe she never knew it in the first place. Either way, she paid the price. Not because Greg Gutfeld is some tyrant who can't handle criticism, but because she crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. In the end, the whole incident served as a reminder of something important, something we maybe needed to be reminded of in this era of constant outrage and manufactured controversy. Disagreement is fine. Debate is healthy. Different perspectives are valuable, but respect is non-negotiable. You can argue without being argumentative. You can challenge without being combative. You can disagree without being disagreeable. Jasmine Crockett chose not to do any of those things. She chose to go on the attack from the moment she sat down. She chose to make things personal. She chose to insult the host, the show, and the audience. And Greg Gutfeld chose not to allow it. That's not censorship. That's not silencing. That's not punching down or being unable to handle strong women or any of the other excuses that might get thrown around. That's just basic standards, basic decency, basic respect for the medium and for the millions of people who tune in every night expecting thoughtful discourse, not personal attacks. Greg gave Jasmine every chance to course correct, every opportunity to walk back her hostility and engage genuinely. She refused. She doubled down. She escalated. So he showed her the door. And the audience, the millions of people watching at home, they understood. They got it. Because they've all been in situations where someone was being unreasonably hostile. They've all dealt with people who mistake aggression for strength, who think that being confrontational makes them brave. They know that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply say no. No, you will not be treated that way. No, you will not allow someone to hijack your platform for their own agenda. No, you will not compromise your standards just to avoid awkwardness. Greg Gutfeld said no, and in doing so, he reminded everyone watching why his show has been successful for so long. It's not just about the jokes or the political commentary or the celebrity guests. It's about maintaining a space where real conversation can happen, where people with different views can come together and talk like adults. But that space requires protection. It requires boundaries. It requires someone willing to enforce basic standards of behavior. That night, Greg was that someone. Jasmine Crockett walked off the set thinking she had somehow won, thinking she had exposed something or made some grand statement. But all she really did was expose herself, her inability to engage in good faith, her refusal to treat others with respect, her fundamental misunderstanding of what productive discourse looks like. The cameras captured it all: the interruptions, the insults, the escalating hostility. And they also captured Greg's patience, his professionalism, and his eventual decision to end the chaos. It was a moment of television that people will remember. Not because it was entertaining in the traditional sense, but because it was real. It was raw. It was a genuine conflict that played out without a script, without manufactured drama, without any pretense. Just two people with very different ideas about how a conversation should go. One who wanted dialogue, one who wanted confrontation, one who maintained his composure, one who lost hers. And when it was over, when Jasmine had stormed off and Greg had said his piece, the message was clear. On this show, respect matters. Decency matters. And if you can't bring those things with you when you walk onto the set, then you won't be staying long. That's not a threat. It's not a power trip. It's just a standard. A line in the sand. A minimum requirement for participation. Jasmine Crockett couldn't meet that requirement, so she's no longer on the show. It's really that straightforward. No conspiracy, no silencing, no censorship. Just consequences for behavior. Just accountability for actions. And maybe, just maybe, that's a lesson more people need to learn. In media, in politics, in everyday life. You don't get to treat people however you want and expect no response. You don't get to be hostile and aggressive and then cry foul when someone pushes back. You don't get to break all the rules and then claim you're a victim when you face consequences. Greg Gutfeld didn't make Jasmine Crockett look bad that night. She did that all on her own. He just refused to let her do it on his show without response. He stood up for himself, for his program, and for his audience. That's not controversial. That's just right.